may do the party stickler to the presence of the jury.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to get everything situated over the long weekend, and we look forward to proceeding with trial. Before we get started, we do need to have you sworn, so if I could have you all stand and raise your right hand, we'll proceed with that.
You and each of you do solemnly swear that you will well and truly try the case at issue and a true verdict render according to the evidence, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated.
All right. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, we're going to turn to opening statements. Mr. Plall, are you ready to give your opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur came to Las Vegas to attend a Mike Tyson fight. After the fight, Tupac, along with Suge Knight, Trayvon Lane, and other people that were with that group, ran into a person named Orlando Anderson. And Orlando Anderson is the defendant's nephew. And when they encountered Orlando Anderson sitting by himself, they attacked him. And that attack was captured on video. Then, a few hours later, Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight drive down Flamingo Road to Club 662, where Tupac is scheduled to perform a concert. Then 2.5 hours later, after Tupac and Suge engaged in the beating of Orlando Anderson, they are gunned down. Tupac is gunned down in a drive-by shooting from a white Cadillac in an act of revenge. During those 2.5 hours, you will learn that the defendant was escalating and planning the retribution for the beating of his beloved nephew. Now, let's be clear. Dwayne Davis did not pull the trigger. But what he did do was plan the retaliation for the beating of his nephew. You will learn that Dwayne Davis got the gun. You will learn that he got into a white Cadillac. You will learn when the opportunity presented itself for retribution, Dwayne Davis made sure that the shooters were armed and ready to execute their revenge. And remarkably, you will learn that from Dwayne Davis himself. But to understand what happened on September 7th, 1996, on the streets of Las Vegas, we need to go about 275 miles west to the city of Compton, California. What you'll learn is that Compton is about 10 square miles. But in the mid-1990s, those 10 square miles were occupied by over 30 gangs claiming its territory. And important to this case, there are two gangs, Mob Piru and the Southside Compton groups. Let's talk a little bit about the Mob Piru. The Mob Piru is a group that associated with the color red. And you'll hear that Suge Knight, the person who was driving Tupac Shakur that night, grew up in the neighborhood of Mob Piru. But by the mid-1990s, he had become a very successful CEO of the record label Death Row Records. But despite, or maybe because where he came from, you'll hear that Suge Knight continued to employ Mob Piru gang members as part of Death Row. They would act as unofficial security, and other times they would engage in, let's call them other acts, on behalf of Suge Knight. But Death Row in the mid-1990s was one of the most successful record labels around. They had artists such as Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and of course, Tupac Shakur. And in 1996, Tupac Shakur was maybe the largest and biggest, most successful rapper around. He had just sold, released All Eyes on Me, a double album that was met with huge success. Additionally, Tupac Shakur was a movie star, having appeared in a number of movies in critically acclaimed roles. He has, at times, been referred to as an icon. But for the purposes of this case, what you need to know is that Tupac Shakur was not a gangster. He was a hip-hop artist associated with the Mob Piru. Now, the other gang that's important to know here is the Southside Compton Crips. And when it comes to Southside, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis was the leader of the Burris Street faction of the Southside Compton Crips. And while Suge Knight rose to prominence in his neighborhood due to the money that he was bringing in through the music industry, Dwayne Davis rose to prominence in his neighborhood because he was a very successful, large-scale drug trafficker. And you will learn that that is how one moves up in the world of gangs, by bringing in money to the neighborhood. The other thing you'll learn is that Orlando Baby Lane Anderson was his nephew, and also a highly respected member of the Southside Compton Crips. Now, as part of this case, you're going to hear another name. Eric Zip Martin. Now, Eric Zip Martin is not a member of the Southside Compton Crips. In fact, he's based out of New York. He's involved in the drug trade and knows Dwayne Davis as a result of both their involvements in the drug trade. Dwayne Davis from the West Coast, Eric Zip Martin from the East Coast. And one of the connections that Dwayne Davis gets through his association with Zip Martin is with Sean Puffy Combs, who was then the CEO of Bad Boy Entertainment. Sean Combs wanted some security when he came out to the West Coast. He was worried about Mob Piru. He was worried about the members of Death Row Records. And so Dwayne Keefe D. Davis agreed to be around to act as unofficial security for Sean Combs and his artists when they came out west, in order specifically to ensure there are no problems with Mob Piru and Death Row Records. And this took a rivalry between Mob Piru and Southside Compton Crips and escalated it. And those tensions boiled over in the Lakewood Mall in the summer of 1996. There, you'll hear that Trayvon Lane, a member of the Mob Piru, associated with Death Row Records, was there with other members of Mob Piru in order to do some shopping. Lakewood Mall was a mall nearby Compton. You'll also hear that Baby Lane Anderson, Orlando Anderson, the defendant's nephew, was there. Now, Trayvon Lane that day was wearing a chain with a Death Row medallion. And there was a fight that occurs between the Mob Piru group and the Southside Compton Crips. And at one point, that chain is pulled off Trayvon Lane's neck. Now, what happened to that chain is an issue of much dispute. Not everybody agrees with it. But the act of disrespect of pulling the Death Row chain and the brawl that occurs further escalates this heated rivalry. And what you'll learn is that these two men, Trayvon Lane and Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, they encounter each other again. This time in Las Vegas. So that brings us back up to September 7th, 1996, here in Las Vegas. Again, Mike Tyson is fighting Bruce Seldon. He disposes of him in less than a round, in a round. Doesn't take a full round. And then after the fight, Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, and the people that are here with, they leave. And among his group is Trayvon Lane. And that is why this fight occurs. Trayvon Lane and the Death Row group sees Orlando Anderson standing by himself, and they decide to attack him in retribution for what happened at the Lakewood Mall. You'll see Orlando Anderson's on the bottom of that group. You see security coming, trying to break this up. And then you'll see Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, Trayvon Lane, and that group exit the MGM Grand. Now, Orlando Anderson was by himself because when Dwayne Davis purchased the tickets for the Bruce Seldon fight, he got them through a scalper. So everybody that came with Dwayne Davis were seated separately throughout the fight. And so Orlando Anderson was, at that time, by himself. You'll see that Mr. Shakur, Mr. Knight, and his group leave the MGM Grand. And you'll see that Orlando Anderson, after being held by security, is questioned for a bit, asked if he wants to press charges. He decides he doesn't want to participate in any type of prosecution and that he doesn't need medical attention. Dwayne Davis hears about this beating. And what you will hear is that in his world, there is no question that a response is required. And you will hear from Dwayne Davis what happens next. Because what happened over the next 2.5 hours is something Dwayne Davis would later describe himself in the secret 2008 interview from his attorney's office with the federal task force. And we'll talk about that interview and the circumstances surrounding that later. But we'll hear about what the next 2.5 hours was. So, what we learn is that Dwayne Davis is upset about the beating of his nephew. And frankly, no, that's not an unusual response. What's unusual is the next steps Dwayne Davis takes. Unusual for the normal person, maybe not unusual for in-gang culture. Dwayne Davis decides he is going to organize a retaliation, that this beating cannot go unanswered. Then he runs into a person named Zip Martin. Remember the Zip Martin that was a connection with Bad Boy Entertainment from New York? And Zip Martin tells him that he has a gun and that he can come help him out.
Okay, where do you go to? What do you tell Zip right now? You tell Zip, hey, we're going to go handle this shit or whatever?
Yeah, like, if y'all want us to come, like, you know what I'm going to do that? They was telling that they going to get the 662 club.
Who's saying that?
Everybody.
Everybody out there?
Yeah, everybody. You want to come?
Well, how do you know that Zip's got a gun? Does he tell
He
you?
was in the lobby, I met him in the lobby. I got one.
Did you ask him? Do you have one? Or he just tells you, yeah, I got one?
Yeah, that's when he asked me, do we need some help? I got some gym. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool.
I don't know what he gave you.
Yeah.
So later, Dwayne Davis organizes 2 vehicles to go over to the 662 Club. Before that, he gets the gun from Zip Martin. He goes out to his Mercedes-Benz, gets the gun from Zip Martin, and then after some time, he assembles 2 cars to go to 662 to violently confront Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight for the beating of his nephew. And you'll hear that Dwayne Davis wasn't initially in the white Cadillac. He goes into a van, and Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, they go in a white Cadillac, and they go to Club 662, waiting for Tupac Shakur, waiting for Suge Knight, waiting for this violent confrontation. And what you'll learn is that Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight don't show up while they're there.
We went, I was in 626 club. They didn't show up. We waited about 15, 20 minutes. They didn't show up. So they're like, let's go get some liquor. We stopped at the liquor store. I got out the van and they had to jump in the Cadillac.
So what you hear Dwayne Davis say is he got out of the van and goes into the Cadillac. And the plan at that point is to go to a liquor store, get some booze, and then go back to the Las Vegas Strip and party. What the original intention was before Orlando Anderson was beaten at the MGM Grand. But on the way back to the Las Vegas Strip, they see a caravan of cars. And that caravan included Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. And in that white Cadillac, before the shooting occurs, Dwayne Davis explains that the driver is Terrence T. Brown. In the rear driver's side is DeAndre Dre, or Big Dre Smith. In the rear passenger side is Orlando Baby Lane Anderson. And that Dwayne Davis himself, KBD, is in the front passenger side. And this is how Dwayne Davis explains the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Yeah. He's a little bookstore right there. Then we came up Harlem at the Long Lake Boulevard. And shit. Here they come that BMW like Jay Carter. And bros, Tupac. I was like, there you go. Made the U-turn. We wasn't supposed to make it. Just wanted the U-turn. They was in a little lane. We just pulled up on the side and checked every car to see where they was.
So what directed your attention to him was some girl shouting at Tupac?
Tupac, he gave his son away. Otherwise, they would have gone away. He all had nothing quick. You know how they do. They was he got him.
You did a U-turn, so then you pull alongside of it. You guys are in the car. Have you already handed him the gun at this point, or at what point do you hand him the gun?
I thought he was going to pull on my side. You know, that's one of them there going to look out for him. You know, he pulled on his side.
So you were fitting to blast if you had to, or you were just...
Yeah, if we would have been on my side, I would have.
Okay. So you hand the gun to the back seat.
Yeah.
You can hear Benny.
I gave it to Dre. Dre was like, no. And Lane's like, dude, fuck, dude.
So what you hear Dwayne Davis admit, that as they see Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight driving to Club 662, Dwayne Davis, along with Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, and Orlando Anderson, decide to make a U-turn, confront Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight. Dwayne Davis had the firearm. It's a firearm he got from Eric Von Zit Martin, and then he passes it to the back. Dwayne Davis says that if they were on his side, if Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight were on his side of the vehicle, he would have shot them himself. But because they were on the other side, he handed it to DeAndre Smith. DeAndre Smith, according to Dwayne Davis, did not want to shoot at that time, so Orlando Anderson shot into that car. Dwayne Davis explains this over and over again.
Literally, on the street.
Okay, Lane starts blasting. You say Suge looks over, he sees you. He looks right at you.
Yeah.
Are you looking at this?
I just know he does something to say, you know.
When he looks over at you, and then, Tupac's busy getting shot. Evidently, the story is Tupac's trying to either get out
In the back seat or something.
Yeah, what do you see happening inside
Jump
there?
in. I see the bullet going through. Yeah, I thought he was dead. He was scraped or something in the head or something.
A piece of glass went into his neck right here.
And he had the thing in the head.
A little gray.
I thought he was dead.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, did you guys stop the two girls? Did you go stop the car and let them get off?
Yeah. And we made the right.
Okay, but he stopped what you said, why you cool, got off, and
We made the right and some broad Seabury and homeless. Stupid bitches. We shot their window around and they stopped.
So Tupac's trying to jump in the back seat. And what Suge was? Nothing?
He couldn't really duck because he was too big, you know. Yeah.
One other thing Dwayne Davis talks about during the murder of Tupac Shakur is that there's a car full of women. I think he calls them broads at one point. Car full of women who are there as well. And you're going to hear from one of those women. And what she's going to tell you is that she disagrees slightly with Mr. Davis's rendition of facts. They were, in fact, communicating with Suge at Tupac's car, but they weren't talking to Tupac, they were talking to Suge. And what she says is she hears gunshots, she sees the white Cadillac flee, and then what Dwayne Davis interprets as them chasing her, she'll tell you is them just panicking and trying to get away. But she will say they inadvertently follow Dwayne Davis and the other people in the white car as they are fleeing. After Suge Knight and Tupac Shakur's vehicle is shot, Suge Knight makes a U-turn and heads back to the Las Vegas Strip. The car ultimately can go no further and stops. Police arrive, medical arrive, and you will hear that Suge Knight was grazed in the head and had some glass going in his neck. He ultimately survives those injuries and is released fairly quickly. You'll also hear that Tupac Shakur was shot multiple times, that he was brought to UMC, and that 6 days later, he succumbed to those injuries. And within 24 hours, the Cadillac and the assailants are back in Compton. They stay the night, and they drive right home as though nothing happened. But a war followed them back to Compton. Because while people were afraid to come forward to police, the police knew and the streets knew that Southside Compton Crips were responsible for this murder. And the war that follows at Compton is a bloody one. You'll hear that Mob Piru and Southside Crip members start shooting at each other. Within 10 days, 3 people are killed. A number of people are shot, including an 11-year-old girl. And what you'll also learn is that none of those cases were prosecuted. Why? Because in this context, in the gang context of this, the combination of gangs and guns is scary. And in this world, silence means survival. The one person who has a hard time being silent is Dwayne Davis. You're going to hear from 1998 to 2023, Dwayne Davis has given a number of statements regarding this case. So, as early as 1998, Davis spoke to the FBI. He admitted he was in Las Vegas during Tupac's murder, but he denies being responsible. Then in 1999, Davis speaks to the FBI again. And these aren't interviews that are focused on the Tupac Shakur murder. These are interviews regarding drug transactions and drug trafficking. But he does say that Tupac does come up, and Dwayne Davis admits to being in Las Vegas for Tupac Shakur's murder. Says he wasn't involved, but he was mad about the fact that Orlando Anderson was beaten, and that his plan was to handle it in Compton had Tupac survived. Then in 2008, the interview of clips we've heard today, in a secret interview with the Federal Task Force, Davis admits to his role in the murder of Tupac Shakur. And we do need to talk a little bit about this 2008 Federal Task Force. Because what this task force is investigating is not the murder of Tupac Shakur. What this task force is investigating is another rapper's murder. A rapper by the name of Christopher Wallace. Somebody who is known as Biggie Smalls, so the notorious B.I.G. Christopher Wallace got murdered 6 months after Tupac Shakur was killed. And there was some allegation that the LAPD might have been involved. So a federal task force was formed to determine what happened to Christopher Wallace. And the interesting thing about the murder of Christopher Wallace is that Christopher Wallace is killed leaving a party in LA. Also at that party, Dwayne Davis. Christopher Wallace there was a suspect vehicle that involved a Chevy SS Impala, and Dwayne Davis happened to own a Chevy SS Impala. Now, as a result of that, the task force decides, well, let's look at Dwayne Davis. And the thing we know about Dwayne Davis is that he trafficked narcotics. And so they were able, through a CI and an undercover, to have a drug transaction with Dwayne Davis. And as a result, Dwayne Davis now has a case, a big trafficking case. And so the federal task force approaches Dwayne Davis and his attorney, and they say, hey, look, we want information regarding the murder of Christopher Wallace. That is what we are trying to investigate. And what Dwayne Davis says is, I don't have any information about that thing, but I can tell you about what we did. I can tell you about Tupac. And that's what he does. He tells a federal task force that that's about his involvement, what you've heard, his orchestration of the murder of Tupac Shakur. That secret conversation, that proffer, was secretly reported and released later. In 2009, Davis is being so helpful to federal authorities that he actually flies out to New York to try and get Zip Martin to implicate himself in the Tupac Shakur murder. Zip Martin at that time was dying of cancer, was out of the game, and really did not engage with Dwayne Davis. In 2009, though, Dwayne Davis gives an interview to Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Detective Dan Long. Now, Dwayne Davis is more guarded in that interview. It is a different setting than the interview of 2008. It's not a secret proffer agreement. But Dwayne Davis does admit a number of things. That he was in Las Vegas. That he was mad about Orlando Anderson getting beat. That he was the boss. That he was in the white Cadillac. And that he procured the firearm that ultimately killed Tupac Shakur. Then, in 2011, the landscape changes. Because in 2011, Greg Kading, the guy who was leading the task force in 2008, the guy who organized the secret proffer between Dwayne Davis and the federal task force, he leaves law enforcement and decides he's going to publish a book about his investigation into Biggie Smalls, the guy who was killed 6 months after Tupac, and Tupac Shakur. And what he puts in the book is that Dwayne Davis confessed to the murder of Tupac Shakur. The book tells the story about Davis' admission, about himself, but it also tells the story of Dwayne Davis telling about his nephew's involvement in the murder, about Big Dre's involvement in the murder, about Terrence Brown's involvement in the murder. And this is a problem for Dwayne Davis, because that meeting was supposed to be secret. And now his cooperation with federal authorities is open to the world. Not only that, Greg Kading is now profiting off Dwayne Davis's life story. So, in 2017, Dwayne Davis decides to go public. He's approached by the producers of a show called Death Row Chronicles that appears on BET. And this is just a small portion of what he says is his motivation for appearing.
When I went in DVD days, I was a copy, kingpin, drug dealer. I'm the only one alive that really can tell you the story about the Tupac Shakur. People have been pursuing me for 20 years. Newspapers, magazines. I'm coming out now to tell the story because I got cancer. I got nothing else to lose. All I care about now is the truth.
Dwayne Davis says, all I want to do now is tell the truth. And in the 2017 public interview, he's a little evasive, but he admits to being the boss. He admits to being in the white Cadillac. And he admits to be part of the murder of Tupac Shakur. And when he says he's the only person that can tell what happened, he's right. Because by 2017, Terrence Brown is deceased. DeAndre Smith is deceased. Orlando Baby Lane Anderson is deceased. Terrence Brown was murdered in an unrelated incident. Orlando Anderson was murdered in an unrelated incident. And DeAndre Smith died from health issues. Remarkably, in 2019, Dwayne Davis then decides he's going to publish his own book. And with regards to the book, it is certainly a lot of self-aggrandizement. But again, the core remains. He was mad about Orlando Anderson about the beating of Orlando Anderson, his nephew. He was in Las Vegas. He got the gun. He was in the white Cadillac, and he handed the gun to the sheriff. And what you'll notice is a constant thing that always goes through these statements is Dwayne Davis's visceral anger at Tupac Shakur for putting hands on his nephew. In the book, he says, them jumping on my nephew gave us the ultimate green light to do something to their ass. Then, Dwayne Davis decides that he's going to do public interviews regarding his role in the murder of Tupac Shakur.
So you ended up getting in the car with Baby Lane and them?
We got this car with homies, yeah. We ran into them, went to the light on Sunset and Flamingo, and dude, we acted like he was in a parade or something. That nigga in that BMW hanging out with us, hey, this Tupac, he's Tupac. And them bitches, they was hollering for him. Yeah, they were that motherfucker. They came up on the side of him. Shit.
Davis's public admissions mirror his private life. He admits to being a leader of Southside Crips. He admits to the significance of the fight over the death row chain at the Lakewood Mall. He admits to being in Las Vegas the night of the fight. He admits to being angry that Tupac stomped Orlando Anderson at the MGM. He admits that he was hunting down Tupac and Suge, first going to 662. He admits that he got a Glock 40 from Eric Zip Martin for the purposes of hunting Tupac. He admits that he was in a white Cadillac with his gang members looking for Tupac. He admits to seeing Tupac in a black BMW and then changing directions, making that U-turn to confront Tupac and Suge. He admits to putting the gun he obtained that night in the back seat of the vehicle so the shooters could shoot. And again, what remains, even as late as 2020, 2021, 22, is Dwayne Davis's visceral anger at Tupac Shakur.
He didn't just, my nephew never jumped over fucking Tupac. Come on, man. Tupac was wrong with two fucking shoes. I mean, don't you get me wrong? Honestly.
Yeah, I think he could, reacted in a better way.
You, listen, homie. You don't think that man is wrong?
He could have reacted in a better way, I guess.
I'm talking, Vlad is his fucking biggest fan. He admitted that man is wrong, man.
He was wrong, man, but that was only done out of loyalty, man.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But he never jumped, my nephew didn't jump on him. He jumped on my nephew. A kid, man. My nephew was a fucking kid. He was a grown-ass man, dude. You know what I'm saying? He was a fucking kid, dude. That's why he had on the channel. He's a fucking kid, dude. You know what I'm saying? They was wrong. My nephew never jumped on him. They jumped on my nephew. My nephew didn't throw a punch, man. Shit was wrong, dude. Jumped on the fucking kid, dude.
And this anger is not just demonstrated publicly, but you will hear as recently as 2024, privately, in a conversation with his son, he talks about his feelings about Tupac Shakur, nearly 30 years after the murder.
What I do is I'll figure out this for him, dude. So you stop drinking and put them on. Oh, we just a little crazy. You know what I'm saying? Fucking fruit. You fucking ass. Jumping on little kids. Always fuck yourself. That is a piece of shit. No?
Everything like this shit, way well, somebody died now. What?
28 years later, that is the visceral anger that Dwayne Davis had for Tupac Shakur. It did it in 2.5 hours. He took care of what he thought was the proper response. And 28 years later, he still is angry about what Tupac did. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur publicly, on camera, participated in a humiliating beating of Dwayne Davis' nephew, Orlando Anderson. And Dwayne Davis knew that in his world, that required a response. And over the years, in private interviews and public statements, and even in private calls, Dwayne Davis has repeatedly told us over and over again about the anger he felt and his own role in the revenge drive-by shooting of Tupac Shakur. And now, nearly 30 years later, we're going to ask you to finally hold Dwayne Davis accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Mr. Stamps, do you wish to give your opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. Wait just a quick second.
Of course, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Yeah. I think this is the HDMI cable.
You got it, or do you want IT to assist you?
I think I got it. This
Okay.
is it, right?
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. We spent a lot of time, I think, when we were picking a jury to determine who would be the right jurors for a case like this. Obviously, we want people who are going to reserve judgment until the end, but really look at the evidence with a critical eye. Now, what the state has just told you, what they believe to be the evidence in this case. But really, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if what they're saying is really truth or fiction, fact or fiction. I don't know if some of you recall, but I had asked the question specifically about what you were holding in your hands. And right now, for instance, you're all holding notepads and pens. That would be a fact, right? And in this case, for instance, I had asked before about the idea of, I can just do this, right? Microphone. I'd ask some of you, if that microphone was buried and dug up 30 years from now, would it still be a microphone? The answer is yes. And the reason why that's important is because in this case, what they are telling you, they're representing it to be a fact when it really is fiction. And it's up to you to determine what the facts are in this case. Now I'm going to give you a timeline here for you to understand just a little bit of how this is going to work, because there's so much evidence in this case that we have to sort of compartmentalize some things. And what I've done is really just sort of focused on the 3 detectives that work this file from beginning to now. First detective you will hear about is Detective Becker. He works the file. He's the original detective on the scene. Detective Long takes over the case for about 15 years or so. And then it ends with Detective Mogg, who presents this to the grand jury in 2023. But why this timeline is relevant is because you have to see the span of time for yourself. 30 years. And ask yourself this, what facts do they have after 30 years? Now, Detective Becker does what every homicide detective does when he arrives on scene. He's assigned to the case. He starts his investigation. At that particular time, though, Tupac Shakur was not dead. He was critically injured. He was at UMC. And it isn't until 6 days later that he passes away. But Detective Becker starts his initial investigation because it's pretty serious, and as a result, he just takes over the investigation. What he will testify to is that Flamingo Cole on a Saturday night, in the middle of a fight between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon, it was very busy when he arrived. And he arrived at a time where he was able to determine cartridge casings, .40 caliber, that was found at the scene. That's another fact for you. But at some point they're going to learn he learns that potentially it was a Glock 40 that was the actual firearm that was used in this case. And then when crime scene analysts arrive on scene, they document the evidence. And they document the cars. That will be important, and you'll determine at some point why the cars are documented. And with regard to Detective Becker, what he'll tell you is police officers write reports. Critical. Hugely important. Why? Because at some point in the future, like in this case 30 years later, Detective Becker will not remember details like he would if he had what? His report in front of him. And that's going to be important for you to consider in this case. Now, what Detective Becker does, though, is because of the outcry, the attention, the media focus on this case, he took his file and he secured it in his office under lock and key. Because he was worried about leaks in Metro, leaking information out to the public, because so many people wanted to know answers to the question as to what happened and who did this to TUPAC Shakur. Now, what you're going to find is, when Detective Becker testifies in this case, is that a lot of his reports are now missing. They're gone. Which is Metro's responsibility to hold and to pass on to the next detective, and then finally to the next detective. Now, Detective Becker also did not trust Compton PD. Why is that important in this case? Because there's an individual by the name of Reggie Wright Sr. He was a lieutenant working in Compton in charge of the gangs in Compton in terms of investigations. His son is Reggie Wright Jr. He was the head of security for Death Row Records, the same security that was here in Las Vegas on the 9th of September 7th, 1996. Death Row Records was affiliated with Mob Pyru Blood, and Detectives Ladd and Brennan from Compton answered directly to Reggie Wright Sr. Becker did not trust Compton PD. And the one thing that he really didn't trust is that most of their information came from confidential informants that were not reliable. And he'll tell you that. And because of his intuition, Compton PD was shut down in September of 2000 due to internal corruption. They just evaporated that police department, and the sheriff's department for LA County absorbed the responsibilities for the police department in Compton because of the corruption that was there. Now, what facts, right? Just like the pads of paper that you have in your hand and the pens that you have in your hand, what facts can we determine from Detective Becker's efforts? First and foremost, we know that TUPAC was shot multiple times. That's a fact. That can be proven. We know that it was with a .40 caliber firearm. That's a fact, due to the cartridge casings. On the corner of Flamingo and Cobalt. That's also a fact. Right? We're on board so far? We know the date, September 7th, 1996. That is a fact. At 11:17 p.m., we know that to be a fact as well. And then finally, that he was in a vehicle during rush of night, and that TUPAC died 6 days later. Those are facts that will not be refuted by anybody in this courtroom during the time that we spend together. But here's the one thing. There are no facts to point to Keefe. Not one. And you're going to hear about this over and over and over again. No facts like the microphone in your hand or the pad of paper that you have that you write on. Detective Long takes over the case in 2002, and he has it from 2002 to 2017. He was, interestingly enough, on the gang unit, and at the time of the shooting, he was in gangs, and he had been one of the first to arrive on scene. He will testify and tell you that every time he did something on this file, he wrote a report. Because that's important. That's what you do as a police officer. And he conducted follow-up interviews, and he made some travel to Compton. He will tell you those things. That's his role in all of this. But here's the thing. Detective Long also encountered some challenges in this case. They had to hide the case file with Metro because people were still accessing the file in Metro, and they weren't authorized to do so. So they changed the case number so that people couldn't find the file. In addition to that, what you're going to learn is LAPD reached out to him called them up and said, hey, Detective Long, we have the gun. And we've tested it, and it matches back to what you're looking for in terms of the weapon that killed Tupac Shakur. Detective Long goes to LAPD, gets the gun, transports it back, gets it tested, and it comes out as not a match. LAPD tells him after, we gave you a fake gun to test you out. This is the level of, I don't know how to put it, that was going on during this time period between Metro, LAPD, and Compton. This is what's happening during this time period. Leads, according to Detective Long, became very scarce and stale, meaning that it was just taking a long time for him to follow up with people. Witnesses became unavailable. Why do you think that is? Because of time. So as a result, memories started failing because of that time. So Detective Long had these challenges. But here's what Detective Long does. He interviews Keefe in 2009. Sits him down, has an interview with Keefe, just like the state said. And guess what happens? Detective Long doesn't even know that Keefe had actually spoken to a task force the year before. How is that possible? Metro is the agency responsible for the investigation of Tupac Shakur's murder, and they don't even know about this. No one in that room in 2008 told Detective Long or Metro what was going on. And you know who was in the room in 2008? You had FBI in the room. You had DEA in the room. You had LAPD in the room. You had the United States Attorney for the Central District of California in that room. And Detective Long does not know about any of that. What you will also learn is out of all those people in that room, not one person verifies what TPD tells them. That the FBI, the gold standard of investigation in our country, did not go out and follow up on what was said. Now, one of the things the state showed you was a picture of a car and indicated there was 4 individuals in that car. And he tell you that at some point, 3 of those individuals are dead and Keefe is the only one that's remaining. But at the time that he gives his statement to the task force in 2008, there's another individual that's still alive. They never interviewed that individual to verify if that information was true. Why not? Because the FBI just fell asleep? That the LAPD just didn't care? Keefe was never charged for any of what he said during that time period. And it's because they knew he was full of crap. Otherwise they would have. Why wouldn't they? When Detective Long comes back to Las Vegas, he goes and he talks it over with the Clark County District Attorney's Office. And you know what happened then? They didn't charge the case either. In 2009. Ask yourself the reason why that is. It's because they just didn't care about Tupac Shakur or his life? Or is it because they looked into it and realized, we can't verify this information, we don't believe this to be true? Why would the Clark County District Attorney's Office not charge him in 2009? Now, what facts do we get out of Detective Long based upon what he did for those 15 years? We don't have any facts. Outside of statements made, allegedly by TPD and other people, we don't have anything to verify any of that information. Not one single thing to corroborate the statements made by that man in 2008 or 2009. Not only by Metro, but by the FBI, by LAPD, by the DEA, by the United States Attorney's Office. No one corroborates any of this. So, 2017 comes along, and an entity called the Center of Investigative Reporting, they file what's called a FOIA request with Metro. And what that means is, FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. It allows or requires government agencies to give up information if you ask for it. That's the rule. It's to be transparent. And people wanted to know what was going on with the murder. files. This is 2017. This is years after any of the statements that were made and anything else. Where's the investigation? What's going on? Well, Metro said, no, we're not going to give it to you. So in 2018, the Senate turns around and files a lawsuit against Metro to force them to give them the file, to show them what work had you been doing over, at that particular point, I don't know, what's that, 20 years? That's when Detective Mogg enters the picture. What you will learn is that Detective Mogg basically says, I'm here just to close out the case. He's not here to solve the mystery of who killed Tupac. So with everything you have in front of you that you're now hearing for the first time in terms of the statements that were made in 2008, 1998, 1990, whatever, Detective Mogg comes along and says, I'm just here to close out the case. That's his role. And what you're going to learn is Detective Mogg received a copy of what's called the Death Row Chronicles in 2018. It's not a deposition. It's not testimony under oath. It's edited, and it's done for extreme purposes. He receives a copy of it. You know what happens when he receives that copy of the interviews that the state has basically shown you in this case? No charges filed. Why? So, Keefe writes a book, allegedly. Right? Allegedly, he writes this book called Contra Free Legend in 2019. You know what happened with the book? Right? Even he confesses to it. What you find is, no charges filed. What is going on? District Attorney's Office doesn't want to charge the case. No charges filed when the interview happens. No charges are filed when the book is written. What is going on? 5 years goes by. And nothing is going on with the case. But Detective Mogg says he's closing it out. Detective Mogg turns around and applies for what's called a search warrant. Now, what a search warrant is that in July of 2023, around that time period, a search warrant requires a police officer to get permission from a judge to basically violate the sanctity and privacy of your home. Right? There's got to be legal reasons for it. He's got to go through that process, and he's got to ask permission from a judge in order for him to get that. And what he does in that search warrant application is he assures the judge, hey, what we are looking for is in the home. The thing that's going to help us solve this crime, who killed Tupac, is in the home. And he signs an affidavit, and that's important. I want you to remember this. He signs an affidavit attesting to what he's saying to this judge to be true and correct. What he says is, I think we have evidence in Keefe D's home that will solve the murder of Tupac. So up until this point, they've got all these statements. They can't be corroborated. So now they're saying, we have evidence in this home that we think probably is in the home. And as a result, we're going to find this evidence. It's going to help us solve this case. What I'm going to tell you right now is they don't find it. And in the meantime, Detective Mogg retires. He now becomes Mr. Mogg. And Mr. Mogg goes to the grand jury. And in the grand jury, it's a secret proceeding. We're not there. The defense, isn't sitting like we are here. It's just the prosecutors. There's a panel of people called the grand jurors, and you have people come up and they testify under oath. And there's really no way for the defense to challenge any of it because it's done in secret. We don't really know about it. But in this particular case, Mr. Mogg is sworn to testify truthfully. And you know what Mr. Mogg does? He just reads pages of the book into the record. He doesn't do any more in terms of an investigation than read pages of a book into the record. He never documents in any of his efforts any verification of the book before he reads it into the record. He walks up, gets on the stand, and reads the book as if it's the gospel truth. And that's what he does. He treats that book like it's fact. Now, what you're going to find out about Mr. Mogg is that he never wrote a report. So when he took over the case in 2017, all the way up until when he retired in 2023 and was in front of the grand jury, he never wrote a report. Not one time. Not like Detective Becker, and not like Detective Long, and not like any other police officer who does their job. This man never writes a report. In fact, what happens is he transitions, right? He's a Metro detective, he retires, and then he gets a job working as an independent contractor for the district attorney's office as an investigator. And as an investigator, he doesn't have any police power. He continues to work as a lead detective on this case. Even though the procedure is you hand your file and your officer's report to the next detective in line. That's how this works. But he keeps the file for himself and he starts billing against the file after he retires as a detective with Metro. Because now he's an independent contractor. That's important to know. Why is that important? Because what the evidence is going to show you is that he backloaded his work. And when he finally writes a report, it's not an officer's report, it's an investigative report that spans from 2018 to current, and we just received it about 5 weeks ago. The importance of capturing everything you do, the accuracy that you would need to be able to be in court on a murder case, not some type of college paper that you forgot to do and then the last second just put something together and, get it out the door. Mr. Mogg does not do any of that. That's going to be important later for you to consider. Because according to that report that he submitted 5 weeks ago or so, he never verified the book. According to that report, he never investigated any of the alternate theories that were out there, and you're going to hear about those alternate theories. There are people who have developed over time answers to the question, who did this and why? He never looked into any of it. Which I think, at the end of the day, don't you want to see what's out there to help you with your investigation? And according to his report, he did more on the case after he became an investigator than he did before when he was a detective. What I'm going to tell you right now is what you're going to find when you listen to all the evidence, that his work was biased, sloppy, and incomplete. Those are the three things you're going to determine for Mr. Mogg. Now, because of the fact that in terms of the evidence itself, he doesn't have much, the state's going to lean pretty heavily on their witnesses. And I'm going to give you a sampling of the type of people you're going to run across in this trial based upon their witness list in this case. First person is this guy named Reggie Wright Jr. He's the security company for Death Row Records. And what he is a felon. Second of all, you're also going to find that he's a former Compton police officer. He worked for Compton PD for about 5 years, and apparently he got disabled. At some point, he becomes a felon. You're going to learn about that. And his father, like I said before earlier, Reggie Wright Sr. was the head of the Compton PD gang unit. What you're also going to learn about Reggie is that, once again, he was supposed to be protecting Suge Knight. Where was he the night of the shooting? In addition to that, he orders his security team to not carry firearms the night of the shooting, before the shooting took place. What you're also going to learn is, he wasn't even around when the shooting occurred. So the principal, meaning the person he should have been protecting the most, would have been Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. This man was nowhere to be found. He was sitting at a club called 662 down the street, waiting for Suge to show up, while he left his people that were working for him unarmed in the vehicles behind Suge Knight. And when push comes to shove, he orders his people to lie to police during their investigation. That's going to be called by them. That guy's going to be called by them. In addition to that, when everything was said and done, Suge Knight went to prison because he was not supposed to be in a fight in Las Vegas. He violates his release. Guess who takes over Death Row Records? Reggie Wright Jr. Now, the state is also going to bring in other people with unreliable positions, including criminal histories, financial motivations, and inconsistent statements. That are the people and the quality of the evidence that you're going to listen to in this case. Just to give you another example, there's going to be an individual by the name of Devonta Dirt Walkley. Who is he? He's been a paid informant for years. You're going to hear that they have paid him to be an informant. He will, of course, say whatever he needs to say to avoid his own criminal actions, but his testimony will be inconsistent. And that's what you have to really rely on, is what exactly is he going to say, and can you even believe it? In addition to that, you're also going to learn about a disgraced LAPD detective by the name of Greg Kading. The state told you about him. He wrote a book. He benefited off of what was happening with regards to Keithy. Now, Greg Kading, he stole the file. What you're going to learn is he actually stole the file. He took the TUPAC and the Biggie case files and walked out the door. This is an LAPD detective that they are using, or one of the people that they're going to be focusing on to establish their case. He writes the book, and then he holds himself out as the person who solves the murder. That's Greg Kading. That's the LAPD detective. Now, what you're also going to learn is Greg Kading, when he was a detective with LAPD, was basically caught manipulating witnesses. And because he was caught manipulating witnesses, it led to cases being overturned as a result. There was a court finding on this issue. A judge determined that. And there we go. That's Greg Kading. That's a witness in this case from that. Now, your challenges, right? I mean, gosh, we're sitting here, there's cameras in the room. I mean, things going on. But it's really time. Like, how do you, as jurors, try to figure out time on this case? There's been so much time. Delays. By who, though? And there's corruption. How do you look at your information that you're receiving with anything more than just like skepticism? Like, you're going to look at this stuff and be like, well, I mean, you have a motive to lie. You have a motive to tell or deceive. And it's because at the end of the day, there's not actual facts. When you get past all the talk and me talking, just look at the actual facts. What facts do you have to support any of what KPD said or any of his interviews or in the book? When you look at this relevant timeline again, and you see the length of time, ask yourself, what facts do they have to even put KPD in a car in Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996? What facts? When you look at the video that happened at the MGM, look for them. Try to find them in there. Try to find any of the other individuals. Remember, he said there's 3 individuals in the car with him and Orlando Anderson. Orlando's in the video because he's getting beat up. Find any of those other individuals on the videos of the MGM. Look for evidence that shows that KPD was even in Las Vegas on the night of the fight. Receipts, credit cards, a picture of him standing next to somebody else, maybe watching the fight from another casino. Something. Give me something. In the book, you're going to learn that Keefe says that he was at the fight. He was sitting on the second row. He was sitting with all the celebrities, and he's dressed in his finest gear. There's not one iota of proof that he was ever at that fight. But you know who does show an iota of proof that he was at the fight? Suge Knight. Suge Knight was raided, and at some point, there is a ticket stub to that fight, the Tyson versus Selden fight with Suge Knight's possession. Because he went to the fight. And you would think, a fight like this, you want to show everyone that you were at the fight. There's no evidence at all that man was even at the fight. When we take fact versus fiction, really at the end of the day, what you're going to hear from witnesses that will testify to this is that KPD was known to do this. That's the testimony you're going to hear in this case. That's what you're going to hear about that man right there. And so you have to ask yourself the question. If I just say things, is that going to end up being one of those things where I'm going to be hemmed up for a murder if I just keep repeating a fiction? I keep repeating that? The answer is no. You have to corroborate everything I say in order for it to be true. Otherwise, it's just that. Forfeit. And at the end of all the time we spend together, what you're going to find is that the state cannot prove to you beyond reasonable doubt the claim that Keefe had anything to do with a first-degree murder with use of deadly weapon. There's no facts to that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandwood. State, at this time, are you prepared to proceed with your case in chief, or did you need a brief break?
Just need a break to bring the evidence in, so maybe give the jury a few minutes.
Sure, we can do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we are going to take a 15-minute break. During this recess, you are admonished not to talk or converse amongst yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected to the trial, or read, watch, or listen to any report or commentary on the trial of any person connected to this case by any means of information, including without limitation, newspaper, television, internet, and radio, or form or express any opinion on any subject connected with the trial until the case is finally submitted to you. We'll have you guys back here at 11 a.m. Please rise for the jury.